The cruelest people always think the room belongs to them. I learned that the night Damien Calloway handed me a Christmas invitation with a smile that never reached his eyes. Snow pressed softly against the 12-foot windows of the Calloway mansion, while 100 gold lights shimmered across the marble floors. The house smelled like pine, cinnamon, and expensive perfume. Everything about that place looked perfect. Everything except the people inside it. I stood near the grand staircase holding a silver tray of champagne glasses while New York's wealthiest guests laughed around me like they had never struggled a single day in their lives. Then Damien appeared at the top of the stairs. Black tuxedo, gray eyes, one hand in his pocket like he owned not just the mansion, but every person breathing inside it. And maybe he did. Conversations slowed the second he walked into the room. That was his effect on people. Silence followed him the way shadows follow fire. "Miss Carter," he said calmly. My fingers tightened around the tray. He only used my last name when he wanted to remind me where I stood. "Yes, sir." His eyes drifted over my plain black uniform before amusement touched the corner of his mouth. "We're hosting the Calloway Christmas Gala tomorrow night." A woman beside him laughed softly. I recognized her immediately. Vanessa Whitmore. Socialite. Famous for humiliating people beneath her. "Oh my God," she said, staring at me. "Don't tell me the maid thinks she's invited." Several guests chuckled under their breath. I kept my face still. That annoyed people more than anger ever did. Damien reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gold invitation card. The room quieted again. Even the pianist downstairs missed a note. Damien stepped closer and placed the invitation carefully onto my tray beside the champagne glasses. "Come tomorrow night," he said. "Let's see if a designer dress can make people forget you clean floors for a living." The room exploded with laughter. Hot embarrassment climbed into my throat, but I refused to let it reach my eyes. Because men like Damien fed on reactions. I had learned that my first week working there. Never let powerful people see you bleed emotionally. Vanessa smirked. "You should come, sweetheart. It'll be entertaining." I looked down at the invitation. Thick cream paper. Gold edges. My name written in elegant black ink. Evelyn Carter. For one dangerous second, I almost handed it back. But then I looked up at Damien. Really looked at him. Past the expensive watch. Past the arrogance. Past the perfect posture. And for the first time, I noticed something strange. He looked lonely. Not sad. Not weak. Just empty in a way rich people try to hide with chandeliers and champagne. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Calloway," I said softly. His expression barely shifted, but the whiskey glass in his hand stopped halfway to his lips. Like he expected me to break. Like he expected tears. Instead, I smiled politely and continued serving drinks while whispers followed me across the ballroom. But later that night, alone in my tiny apartment 15 miles from Manhattan, I placed the gold invitation on my kitchen table beside an unpaid electric bill and stared at it for a long time. Snow fell quietly outside my window. Somewhere across the city, Damien Calloway was probably forgetting I existed. But I couldn't stop hearing his words. "Let's see if a designer dress can make people forget you clean floors for a living." Slowly, I opened an old closet near my bedroom and pulled out a garment bag covered in dust. My mother's red evening gown still hung inside. Elegant. Timeless. Untouched for years. I brushed my fingers across the fabric carefully while my heartbeat slowed into something dangerous. Because suddenly, I didn't want revenge. I wanted to see the expression on Damien Calloway's face when I walked into that ballroom and made the entire room regret laughing at me. My apartment looked even smaller beside that dress. The red fabric spilled across my bed like a memory that refused to die quietly. Outside, New York traffic echoed faintly through the frozen December night, while snow dusted the fire escapes across the street. I stood in front of the mirror wearing sweatpants and an old sweater, staring at a version of myself I had not seen in years. Or maybe ever. My mother used to say, elegance was not something you wore. It was something people felt when you walked into a room. I never understood that growing up. Back then, elegance was private schools, piano lessons, and Christmas galas where women smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. Then my father lost everything in 18 months. Investments collapsed. Friends disappeared. Our house sold before spring arrived. By 21, I was cleaning rooms in hotels just to survive. Funny how quickly society changes the way it looks at you once your last name stops being useful. I carefully unzipped the garment bag completely and lifted the gown into the light. Dark red satin, open shoulders, timeless. The kind of dress that belonged beside crystal chandeliers and expensive champagne, not inside a 500-square-foot apartment with flickering kitchen lights. My phone buzzed against the counter. A text from my coworker, Maria. Please tell me you are not actually going to that party. I smiled faintly and typed back. I have not decided yet. 3 dots appeared instantly. Men like Damien Calloway do not invite women like us anywhere without a reason. I stared at the message for several seconds because deep down, she was right. Men like Damien collected reactions. Fear, admiration, obedience. That was power to people like him. But something about the way he looked at me downstairs kept replaying in my head. Not the arrogance, not the mockery, the pause afterward. As if he expected me to shatter and could not understand why I did not. I placed my phone down and walked toward the tiny bathroom mirror. The fluorescent light above it buzzed softly while I removed my glasses and loosened my hair from its bun. Blonde waves fell over my shoulders slowly. For a moment, I barely recognized myself. At work, I always kept everything neat and invisible. Hair tied back, minimal makeup, quiet voice. People only notice maids when something goes wrong. That is the rule. But tonight, standing there with snow falling beyond the window and that red dress behind me, I remembered something dangerous. I was not born invisible. The next morning, Manhattan glittered beneath fresh snow. Every luxury store along Fifth Avenue looked like a movie set. Giant wreaths hung above polished windows, while couples carried shopping bags worth more than my monthly rent. By noon, the Calloway mansion had transformed into chaos. Florists arrived carrying white roses. Caterers filled the kitchen. Security guards checked guest lists near the entrance. And somewhere upstairs, Damien Calloway was preparing for another night where everyone in the room would pretend to love him because he was rich enough to change their lives with one signature. I spent most of the afternoon polishing wine glasses in silence until I heard footsteps behind me. So, Vanessa Whitmore said smoothly, "Did you find yourself a fairy godmother yet?" Her friends laughed quietly. I kept drying the glass. "I already have a dress." That surprised them. Vanessa crossed her arms. "This I have got to see." Before I could answer, another voice entered the room. Calm, deep, controlled. "Miss Carter." Damien stood near the doorway, adjusting his cufflinks. Snowlight spilled behind him through the tall windows, outlining him in silver. His eyes moved over me briefly before settling back on the papers in his hand. "Do not embarrass yourself tonight." The room went silent again. I should have looked away. Instead, I held his gaze for 3 long seconds. "That depends," I said quietly, "on who plans to be embarrassed." For the first time since I met Damien Calloway, he smiled for real. By 7 o'clock, the Calloway mansion no longer looked like a house. It looked like the kind of place people lost themselves in. Golden lights wrapped around 20-foot pine trees outside, while luxury cars lined the snowy driveway one after another. Women stepped out wearing diamonds that caught the flash of cameras like ice under sunlight. Men in tailored tuxedos shook hands beside marble pillars as if the entire world belonged to them. Maybe it did. I stood in my apartment staring at my reflection one final time while my heartbeat echoed louder than the city outside my window. The red gown fit perfectly, like it had waited years for this exact night. I pinned my hair back loosely, leaving soft waves over one shoulder, then reached for my mother's silver earrings. They were the only expensive thing I still owned. "Do not let them decide your worth," she used to tell me before every school gala. At the time, I thought she meant confidence. Now I understood she meant survival. My cab arrived at exactly 7:43. The driver looked at me twice in the rearview mirror during the ride downtown. Not in a disrespectful way. More like he was trying to figure out how someone dressed like me ended up climbing out of a yellow taxi instead of a limousine. Honestly, I wondered the same thing. Snow fell heavier by the time we reached the mansion. Flashbulbs exploded near the entrance while guests climbed the front stairs laughing beneath umbrellas held by security staff. I stepped out carefully, my heels sinking slightly into fresh snow. The cold air brushed against my skin instantly, but strangely, I felt calm. For the first time in years, I was not hiding. One of the doormen opened the massive front doors before I even reached them. Warm music and chandelier lights spilled outside into the winter air. "Welcome, miss," he said politely. "Mississippi, not Maid." Funny how quickly appearances changed everything. The ballroom looked unreal. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while a live orchestra played near the grand staircase. Servers carried trays of champagne through crowds wrapped in velvet, diamonds, and old money perfume. Conversations floated through the room in soft waves until the double doors behind me opened completely. Then something strange happened. Silence. Not all at once. More like a ripple moving slowly through water. One conversation stopped. Then another. Then another. Violin strings faded awkwardly in the distance. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me before I even lifted my head fully. A woman near the staircase lowered her champagne glass. A man whispered something under his breath. Someone else muttered, "Who is that?" I stepped forward slowly, my heels echoing against marble floors that suddenly sounded much louder than before. And then I saw him. Damien stood near the center of the ballroom, beside a group of investors and socialites. Black tuxedo, one hand, holding a whiskey glass. Calm posture, controlled expression. But the second his eyes found mine, everything changed. The glass stopped halfway to his lips. His jaw tightened slightly. And for the first time since I met him, Damien Calloway looked completely unprepared. Vanessa Whitmore turned toward the entrance beside him and actually blinked twice like her brain could not process what she was seeing. "No," she whispered softly. "That cannot be her." But it was. I kept walking. Slowly. Calmly. Every step felt like reclaiming something nobody had the right to take from me in the first place. Men stared too long. Women straightened their posture instinctively. Even the orchestra seemed distracted. Then Damien finally moved. He placed his whiskey glass down carefully without looking away from me once. The room watched him the same way people watch storms approach over the ocean. Dangerous. Beautiful. Impossible to ignore. When I stopped a few feet away from him, neither of us spoke immediately. The silence stretched between us beneath crystal lights and falling snow outside the windows. Then Damien looked at me from head to toe once, slow enough to make the entire room hold its breath. "Miss Carter," he said quietly. His voice sounded different tonight. Lower. Rougher somehow. "You came." I smiled politely. "You invited me." The entire ballroom changed after that moment. I could feel it in the way conversations stumbled whenever I walked past. In the way women adjusted their posture when I entered their circle. In the way men suddenly volunteered to bring me champagne like they had forgotten I spent the last 8 months serving them instead. Wealthy people pretend confidence comes naturally to them, but the truth is simpler than that. They only feel powerful when everyone agrees on who matters. Tonight, that agreement cracked. Damien remained near me longer than expected after our first exchange. Not close enough to seem obvious, just close enough for people to notice. And they noticed everything. "You look beautiful tonight," an older senator's wife told me softly while studying my dress with narrowed eyes. "Thank you," I replied politely. "Who designed it?" I touched the satin near my waist gently. "It belonged to my mother." That answer confused her more than any designer label could have. Before she could ask another question, Vanessa Whitmore appeared beside us, carrying a champagne glass between perfectly manicured fingers. Her smile looked expensive and completely fake. "There you are," she said brightly. "Everyone has been dying to know where Damien found you." The sentence sounded playful. The intention underneath it was not. Several nearby guests turned toward us instantly, waiting. Rich people loved public humiliation as long as they were never the target. I kept my expression calm. "I work here," I answered simply. Vanessa laughed louder than necessary. "Right. The maid." A few people shifted awkwardly. One man looked down into his drink. Another woman suddenly became very interested in the orchestra. Nobody stepped in. They never do when power is involved. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "Although honestly, I almost did not recognize you without the cleaning uniform." I smiled softly. "That is interesting." Her eyebrows lifted. "What is?" "I recognized you immediately." A few quiet laughs escaped nearby guests before people quickly tried hiding them. Vanessa's smile froze for half a second. Tiny, almost invisible, but enough. "Careful," she said lightly. "Confidence can become embarrassing very quickly. So can arrogance." This time nobody hid their reaction fast enough. I heard a man choke slightly on his whiskey behind me. Another woman covered her smile with her hand. Vanessa's face hardened beneath the ballroom lights. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Women like you always forget one thing. And what is that? This world is temporary for you." Her words should have hurt. Maybe months ago they would have. But standing there beneath crystal chandeliers while snow drifted silently outside the windows, I suddenly realized something important. Vanessa needed me to feel small because it protected the illusion that she was important for reasons deeper than money and status. And deep down, I did not think she believed that illusion anymore. Maybe, I said quietly, but kindness lasts longer than invitations. Silence, sharp and immediate. The orchestra continued playing somewhere behind us, but our corner of the ballroom felt frozen in place. Then suddenly, a low voice entered beside me. Miss Whitmore. Damien. Vanessa stepped back instantly. Her entire posture changed the second he arrived. Softer, more careful. Damien looked between us once. Gray eyes unreadable. Is there a problem? Vanessa forced a smile. Of course not. Damien's gaze shifted toward me. Miss Carter. I held his eyes steadily. Everything is fine. He studied me for 2 long seconds like he was trying to understand something that made no logical sense to him. Then one corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not amusement exactly. Respect. And somehow that felt far more dangerous. Damien extended his hand toward me calmly. There is a dance beginning in a few minutes. The ballroom seemed to inhale all at once. Vanessa stared at him, shocked. So did everyone else. Because men like Damien Calloway did not ask maids to dance in front of Manhattan's elite. They barely acknowledged they existed. I looked at his hand. Strong, steady, powerful enough to control entire companies with a signature. Then I looked back into his eyes and realized something unexpected. Damien Calloway was not inviting me onto the dance floor anymore. He was asking permission. The orchestra began playing a slow jazz melody while Damien kept his hand extended toward me without the slightest sign of hesitation. Around us, conversations faded into whispers sharp enough to cut through crystal and music. Every person in that ballroom understood exactly what this moment meant. A man like Damien Calloway did not do anything accidentally, especially not in public. I placed my hand in his carefully. Warm fingers, steady grip. The second his skin touched mine, something unreadable crossed his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition, as if he had expected confidence, but not calm. He guided me toward the center of the ballroom, while hundreds of eyes followed us across polished marble floors. I could practically hear society rearranging its rules in real time. You seem very comfortable tonight, Damien said quietly. Once we reached the dance floor, one hand settled respectfully at my waist while the other held mine. Precise, controlled, like a man terrified of losing control. Should I not be? I asked. His jaw shifted slightly. Most people in this room are intimidated by me. That sounds lonely. The words escaped before I could soften them. For one brief second, Damien looked genuinely caught off guard. Not angry, just unprepared. The orchestra swelled softly around us while snow continued falling behind the towering windows. His hand tightened almost imperceptibly at my waist. You speak to me differently than everyone else, he said. Maybe everyone else is too busy trying to impress you. And you are not. I looked directly into his eyes. Gray, cold from a distance. But up close, there was exhaustion hidden underneath them. No, I answered honestly. I think you are tired of being impressed. Silence settled between us again. But this time it did not feel uncomfortable. It felt dangerous. Because tension becomes something entirely different when two people stop pretending. Around us, guests watched openly now. Some curious, some jealous, some deeply offended. Vanessa Whitmore stood near the champagne tower, gripping her glass tightly enough to leave fingerprints on the crystal. One older businessman whispered something to another guest while staring directly at Damien. The billionaire ignored all of it. That surprised me more than the dance itself. Men like Damien usually live for control over public perception. Yet tonight, he looked at me like the room had disappeared entirely. Where did you learn to dance like this? He asked after a moment. I smiled faintly. Connecticut boarding school. His eyes narrowed slightly. Boarding school. I realized too late what I had revealed. My family was different once, I said carefully. Damien studied my face in silence while guiding me effortlessly across the ballroom. He moved with natural confidence. The kind built from generations of wealth and expectation. Different how? The kind of different that disappears after lawyers get involved. A quiet laugh escaped him unexpectedly. Deep. Genuine. Several nearby guests immediately turned toward us because apparently nobody had heard Damien Calloway laugh in years. You are mysterious, Miss Carter. No, I said softly. You just never asked who I was before tonight. That hit him harder than I expected. I saw it instantly in his expression. The truth has a strange way of silencing powerful people because nobody speaks honestly around them anymore. The song slowed near its ending. Damien glanced down at me briefly before speaking again. I misjudged you. You judged me exactly the way everyone else here did. And you think I am like them? I looked around the ballroom. Diamonds. Champagne. Smiles hiding calculations. I think you built a world where people are valued by what they can offer you. His hand loosened slightly at my waist. Not from anger. From thought. And what do you think you offer me? He asked quietly. The question lingered between us beneath chandelier light and violin strings. I should have answered carefully. Instead, I told the truth. Peace. Damien stopped moving for half a heartbeat. Just enough for the orchestra rhythm to stumble around us. Then suddenly, applause erupted nearby as the song ended. But Damien did not let go of my hand immediately. His eyes remained locked on mine, while the rest of Manhattan's elite watched in confused silence. Because for the first time all night, the most powerful man in the room no longer looked in control of himself. Applause filled the ballroom, but Damien still held my hand, like letting go required actual effort. Around us, conversations slowly returned, though quieter now. Different. People were no longer whispering about the billionaire hosting the most exclusive Christmas party in Manhattan. They were whispering about the maid he could not stop looking at. I felt it everywhere. In the curious glances. In the jealousy hidden beneath expensive smiles. In the uncomfortable realization spreading across the room that status suddenly meant less than presence. Damien finally released my hand, but only after his thumb brushed lightly against my fingers once. Small movement. Barely noticeable. Somehow it felt louder than the orchestra. Would you like some air? He asked quietly. I should have said no. A smart woman would have. Men like Damien Calloway did not invite women into private moments unless they wanted something. But there was something strange happening beneath his calm expression tonight. Something uncertain. And powerful men became dangerous when uncertainty entered their lives. All right, I answered softly. He guided me through the ballroom while guests subtly moved aside to let us pass. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody dared. We stepped through tall glass doors onto the rear terrace overlooking the snow-covered gardens. The cold winter air wrapped around me instantly, carrying the scent of pine and distant fireplaces. Manhattan glittered beyond the trees like another universe entirely. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence outside felt different from the ballroom silence. Softer. Honest somehow. Damien loosened the top button of his tuxedo jacket slightly while snowflakes drifted through the golden terrace lights. You were right, he said suddenly. I looked at him. About what? This world. His eyes moved toward the ballroom windows where wealthy guests laughed beneath chandeliers. People here only value what increases their status. You included? A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Especially me. That answer surprised me. Most powerful people protected their image like religion. Damien spoke about himself like a man already exhausted by the performance. I rested my hands lightly against the cold stone railing. Then why build a life around people you do not respect? He stared out across the snowy gardens for several seconds before answering. Because respect and trust are not the same thing. That sounds complicated. It is lonely. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. No arrogance. No performance. Just truth slipping out when he was too tired to stop it. Somewhere inside the ballroom, laughter erupted loudly before fading again beneath music. Damien glanced toward the sound with visible disinterest. Do you know what the strange part is? He asked quietly. What? I invited you tonight because I thought embarrassing you would entertain me. His jaw tightened. Slightly afterward, like he hated admitting it aloud. And now? I asked. His eyes returned to mine slowly. Gray beneath snowfall and golden light. Now I cannot stop wondering how many people underestimated you before I did. The air between us shifted again. Dangerous. Intimate in a way that had nothing to do with touching. I looked away first, focusing on snow gathering along the terrace railing. People usually see what makes them comfortable, I said softly. It is easier to believe someone cleaning floors could never understand your world. But you do understand it. I grew up in it. Silence. Damien turned toward me completely now. Connecticut boarding school, he repeated quietly. Your family had money. I nodded once. A long time ago. What happened? I hesitated. The subject still felt like pressing against old bruises. My father trusted the wrong people. By the time I was 21, everything was gone. Damien watched me carefully, and nobody helped. A soft laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Rich people disappear faster than poor people once the money is gone. Something dark crossed his expression then. Not anger exactly. Recognition. Like he understood that kind of betrayal better than he wanted to admit. Snow continued falling around us in slow silence. Then Damien removed his tuxedo coat without warning and draped it carefully over my shoulders. Warmth wrapped around me instantly. His cologne lingered faintly in the fabric. Expensive. Clean. Dangerous. You are cold, he said simply. And you are not. I stopped noticing discomfort years ago. I looked up at him then. Really looked at him. At the exhaustion hidden beneath perfect posture. At the loneliness beneath control. And suddenly I realized the terrifying truth about Damien Calloway. He did not know how to be cared for without suspecting manipulation. Before I could respond, the terrace doors opened behind us sharply. Damien, a male voice called. You need to see this. Damien did not look away from me immediately, but something in his expression hardened again, the walls returning. And deep down, I already knew whatever waited inside that ballroom was about to change. The entire night, Damien slipped back into the ballroom beside me, but the softness from the terrace was gone. His shoulders straightened. His expression cooled. It was like watching someone lock steel doors from the inside. The man who had placed his coat over my shoulders minutes earlier disappeared beneath the billionaire everyone feared again. Guests immediately noticed the shift. Powerful people always sense changes in other powerful people the way sailors sense storms. What happened? I asked quietly as we crossed the ballroom. Damien did not answer immediately. His business partner, Victor Hale, stood waiting near the grand staircase with visible tension in his face. Mid-50s. Sharp suit. Sharper eyes. The kind of man who measured every room financially before emotionally. We have a problem, Victor said under his breath once we approached. Damien glanced toward me briefly. You can speak. Victor looked uncertain for half a second before lowering his voice anyway. Whitmore Capital just announced they are pulling out of the merger. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. Tonight. Apparently Vanessa convinced her father this party has become. His eyes flicked toward me awkwardly. Unprofessional. I almost laughed. Billionaires destroyed each other with smiles and wine glasses instead of fists. Somehow it looked colder. Damien remained silent for several seconds while orchestra music drifted behind us. Around the room, people pretended not to stare while absolutely staring. Rumors moved through wealthy crowds faster than fire. Victor exhaled quietly. Damien, this deal is worth almost $400 million. I know what it is worth. His voice turned flat enough to freeze air. Victor lowered his tone further. Then maybe stop giving Manhattan reasons to question your judgment. The meaning behind those words landed clearly. I felt it instantly. So did Damien. His eyes darkened slightly. Be careful, Victor. I am trying to help you. No, Damien said calmly. You are trying to protect investors from gossip. Silence stretched between them while snow tapped softly against the ballroom windows. Victor finally looked toward me directly for the first time all night. Miss Carter, he said politely, though distance remained in every syllable. You seem like a lovely woman. But you should understand something about men like Damien. Damien's posture hardened immediately beside me. Victor continued anyway. People do not forgive weakness at this level. Before I could answer, another voice entered behind us. Female. Older. Shocked. Evelyn. Every muscle in my body froze. Slowly, I turned toward the staircase. A silver-haired woman stood near the entrance, clutching a champagne glass with trembling fingers. Elegant black gown. Pearl earrings. Familiar eyes. Mrs. Kensington. My mother's closest friend from our old Connecticut social circle. I had not seen her in almost 6 years. The second recognition crossed her face. The room shifted again. Oh my God, she whispered. Nearby conversations faded almost instantly. Wealthy people loved secrets more than luxury. Mrs. Kensington stepped closer, still staring at me in disbelief. Evelyn Carter? Whispers spread through the ballroom like electricity. Carter. The name still meant something to old money families. Not wealth anymore, but memory. Vanessa Whitmore appeared across the room with sudden confusion written across her face. Wait, she said slowly. Carter. Mrs. Kensington looked around the ballroom, almost offended. Does nobody here know who she is? Silence. Complete silence. I closed my eyes briefly because I already knew where this was going. Her father was Jonathan Carter. Mrs. Kensington continued. The Carter Foundation? Greenwich Estates? Her family practically funded half the art museums in Connecticut before the collapse. Shock moved visibly through the crowd. One man muttered something under his breath. Another woman stared at me differently now, as if my face had transformed in real time. Same dress. Same person. Suddenly worthy because wealth had once touched my last name. It disgusted me instantly. Vanessa looked completely speechless. That is impossible, she whispered. Damien turned toward me slowly then. Really slowly. Like every conversation we had tonight suddenly rearranged itself inside his head. You never told me, he said. Quietly. Because it should not matter. My voice came out softer than I intended. But it does matter here, does it not? Nobody answered. They did not need to. The ballroom itself answered for them. In the way people looked at me now. Curious instead of dismissive. Respectful instead of amused. Damien stared at me for several long seconds while realization settled behind his eyes piece by piece. Then finally, almost too quietly to hear, he said something that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. They should have respected you before they knew your last name. The atmosphere inside the ballroom never fully recovered after that moment. It was subtle at first. A different tone in people's voices. Longer stares when I walked past. Smiles that suddenly looked more respectful now that my last name carried history again. Nothing about me had changed in the last 10 minutes except the information they possessed. And somehow that made the entire room feel uglier. Damien seemed to notice it too. His expression darkened every time another guest approached me with sudden warmth they had not shown earlier. Evelyn, Mrs. Kensington said gently while touching my arm. Your mother would be so proud seeing you tonight. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. Thank you. She was one of the kindest women I ever knew. Before I could answer, a male voice interrupted nearby. Kindness does not pay Manhattan rent. The comment came from a younger investor standing beside the champagne tower. Mid-30s. Drunk enough to mistake cruelty for charm. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, but nobody corrected him. He looked directly at me with a smirk. No offense, Miss Carter, but if your family was so important once, how exactly did you end up cleaning houses? Silence spread immediately. Sharp. Waiting. The man clearly expected embarrassment. Maybe even tears. Instead, I looked at him calmly. The same way most people lose everything, I answered softly. By trusting the wrong person. A few guests lowered their eyes. Others pretended sudden interest in their drinks. The investor laughed lightly. Still, must have been quite a fall. Before I could respond, another voice cut through the ballroom like cold steel. That is enough. Damien. Every head turned instantly. He stood near the staircase with one hand in his pocket and absolute fury hidden beneath controlled posture. The investor blinked awkwardly. Damien, I was only joking. Then you should learn the difference between humor and humiliation. The room froze completely. Nobody moved. Nobody even lifted a glass. Damien stepped closer slowly, eyes locked on the investor with terrifying calm. Miss Carter is a guest in my home tonight. His voice remained quiet. Somehow that made it worse. And any person incapable of showing her respect is welcome to leave. The investor's face drained of color. Around us, people exchanged stunned glances because billionaires protected business deals all the time. They did not publicly destroy social alliances for maids, or former maids, or women who unsettled them in ways they could not explain. I apologize, the investor muttered quickly toward me. Damien did not look away from him. Not to me. The man swallowed hard before facing me fully. Miss Carter, I apologize. I nodded once. Thank you. The investor disappeared into the crowd almost immediately afterward. Silence lingered behind him like smoke. Then Damien finally turned toward me. Something vulnerable flickered behind his gray eyes before disappearing again. Are you all right? The question sounded genuine. Not performative. Genuine concern from a man who probably had not allowed himself to care openly about another person in years. Yes, I answered quietly. You did not have to do that. Yes, he said softly. I did. Neither of us moved for a moment. Snow continued falling beyond the tall ballroom windows while the orchestra slowly resumed, playing somewhere in the distance. Around us, People tried pretending they were not listening anymore. They failed completely. Damien lowered his voice slightly. I spent most of my life believing powerful people stayed powerful by never appearing emotional. His eyes held mine steadily. Tonight you made me realize something embarrassing. What is that? A faint smile touched his mouth, though sadness remained underneath it. Respect feels very different once it becomes personal. My heartbeat stumbled unexpectedly, not because of the words themselves, because Damien Calloway looked terrified after saying them, as if honesty cost him more than money ever could. Then suddenly, Vanessa Whitmore appeared beside us again, but this time her confidence looked forced, fragile around the edges. She glanced between Damien and me before speaking carefully. Damien, your father just arrived. Everything changed instantly. Damien's expression hardened. The softness disappeared from his face so quickly it almost hurt to watch. Across the ballroom, the massive entrance doors opened slowly while conversations lowered into nervous whispers. And the second I saw the older man step inside beneath the chandelier light, I understood exactly where Damien learned how to turn emotions into walls. Richard Calloway entered the ballroom like a man walking into a courtroom he already owned. Tall, silver-haired, impossibly composed. The kind of presence that made people straighten their posture without realizing it. Conversations lowered instantly around him while investors and politicians subtly shifted closer, hoping to be noticed. Damien looked nothing like his father at first glance. But the closer I watched them together, the more similarities appeared. Same controlled posture. Same emotional distance. Same eyes trained to reveal absolutely nothing. Richard's gaze moved across the ballroom slowly before landing on me. Not curious. Evaluating. So, he said calmly as he approached us. This is the woman everyone suddenly finds fascinating. Damien's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Father. Richard ignored him completely at first. His attention remained fixed on me like he was reading financial reports instead of a person. Evelyn Carter, he said. I knew your mother. She spoke highly of you. It was not entirely true. My mother used to call Richard Calloway the loneliest man she had ever met. But tonight did not feel like the moment to repeat that observation. Richard nodded once before glancing toward Damien. Interesting choice of company for a business gala. The room went still again. Damien's expression hardened immediately. She is my guest. Tonight. Richard adjusted his cufflinks calmly. And tomorrow? Nobody moved. Not a single champagne glass lifted. It amazed me how wealthy people could turn conversations into power struggles without ever raising their voices. Damien stepped slightly closer to me. Subtle movement. Protective. What exactly are you implying? Richard finally looked at his son directly. I am implying that emotional decisions tend to become expensive. Silence. Sharp enough to cut through the orchestra music behind us. I suddenly understood something important about Damien. His father did not teach him warmth because nobody had ever shown Richard warmth first. Men raised in power often inherited loneliness like family property. With respect, Mr. Calloway, I said softly, I do not think kindness should be considered a financial risk. Several nearby guests exchanged nervous glances instantly. Nobody challenged Richard Calloway publicly. Nobody except apparently me. Richard studied me carefully for several seconds. Then surprisingly, the corner of his mouth moved slightly. You sound exactly like your mother. The comment caught me off guard. You remember her? Your mother once embarrassed an entire charity board because they judged a waitress for dropping wine. A faint smile appeared in his eyes briefly. She made 6 millionaires apologize before dessert arrived. I could not stop the small laugh escaping my throat. Beside me, Damien looked stunned. Probably because it was the first genuine warmth he had ever seen from his father. Richard's expression faded back into composure almost immediately afterward. She was a remarkable woman. She was, I answered quietly. For a moment, the tension softened between all three of us beneath the chandelier light. Then Richard glanced toward Damien again. Your merger collapsed tonight because investors believe you are distracted. Damien remained completely still. I am aware. And are they wrong? The question lingered heavily in the air. Damien looked at me for one brief second before answering. No, several guests inhaled sharply. Even I felt my heartbeat stumble. Because men like Damien never admitted vulnerability publicly. Ever. Richard watched his son carefully then. Not angry. Just thoughtful. Almost sad. Do you know the difference between powerful men and wise men? He asked quietly. Damien said nothing. Richard's eyes moved toward me briefly before returning to his son. Powerful men protect their image. Wise men protect the people who remind them they are still human. Silence spread through the ballroom once more. But this silence felt different. Not tense. Honest. Richard adjusted his jacket calmly before stepping back. "Merry Christmas, Damien." Then he looked at me one final time. "And Miss Carter, thank you for reminding my son that admiration and respect are not the same thing." He walked away beneath the chandelier lights while whispers slowly returned across the ballroom. Damien stood beside me without speaking for several seconds. His eyes followed his father through the crowd with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not fear, not anger, grief. "He was not always like this," Damien said quietly. "Cole." Damien nodded faintly. "My mother died on Christmas morning when I was 14. My chest tightened instantly. Damien. After that, he stopped loving things openly." Snow continued falling softly beyond the ballroom windows while orchestra music echoed through the mansion like memory itself. Damien looked down at me slowly, exhaustion finally replacing control in his eyes. "And I think," he admitted quietly, "I learned to do the same."